Eli Turner had lived alone for so long that silence had become his closest friend. His ranch lay far out on the open plains of Montana, miles away from the nearest town. The land stretched endlessly, painted with tall grass, distant hills, and the soft whisper of the wind. Every morning, Eli woke up before sunrise, brewed himself black coffee, and stepped out to the porch to look over the land he had built with his bare hands. The cattle grazed quietly. The fences needed mending every few weeks, and his only companion was an old border collie named Dusty. He was a man of few words and simple habits. His rough hands spoke of years spent working under the sun, and his face carried the calmness of a man who had seen both hardship and loneliness. He had known loss too. His parents had died early, and his younger brother, the only family he had left, was taken by a snowstorm one winter when their wagon overturned. That memory had built walls around Eli's heart. Since then, he had poured his life into his ranch, never expecting company or kindness. But time has a strange way of changing even the hardest hearts. As Eli grew older, the silence began to feel heavier. The long nights felt longer. The sound of laughter, something he hadn't heard in years, echoed in his memory like a faraway tune. One cold evening, while sitting near the fireplace, Eli found himself reading an advertisement in the town newspaper. It was for a matchmaker agency in Kansas that helped lonely men find wives willing to travel west as mail-order brides. At first, he shook his head and folded the paper away. The idea sounded foolish to him. But that night, as the wind howled against the window and the firelight flickered across the empty room, the thought would not leave him. He had built a fine ranch, had land and food, but no one to share it with. A week later, he wrote his first letter. His words were plain and honest, just like him. He said he was a rancher, 50 years old, not rich but decent. He promised kindness, hard work, and a roof over his wife's head. He sent the letter and didn't expect an answer. But 2 weeks later, one came. The woman's name was Lydia Harper. She was 28, living in Kansas and working as a seamstress. She wrote in neat, gentle handwriting and said she admired men who worked the land. Her letter was kind, and something about her tone felt real. Eli read it several times before he replied. Over the next few months, they exchanged letters. Lydia spoke of her dreams of open skies, of tending a garden, of wanting to build a peaceful home. She wrote about how she longed for a simple life away from the noise of towns. Eli began to look forward to her letters more than anything else. He even kept them neatly tied with a ribbon in his drawer. For the first time in years, hope quietly returned to his life. When Lydia finally agreed to come west and marry him, Eli felt a nervous excitement he hadn't felt since boyhood. He cleaned the house from corner to corner, patched the leaky roof, and even bought a new tablecloth from the general store in town. The preacher and his wife promised to come out for the wedding. The neighbors, few though they were, said they'd bring pies and bread for the celebration. The morning Lydia was due to arrive was bright and clear. Eli dressed in his best shirt, brushed his old hat, and stood outside his gate. Dusty sat beside him, tail wagging as if he too understood that this day was different. The sound of wheels creaking over the dirt road soon reached his ears. He looked up to see the stagecoach slowly making its way down the trail, its horses tired from the long journey. His heart thumped faster with every turn of the wheel. He had pictured this moment in his mind 100 times. The young woman stepping down, smiling shyly, maybe holding a small suitcase. He imagined she'd be nervous, maybe even afraid, but he was ready to make her feel safe. The stagecoach finally stopped. The driver jumped down and opened the door. Eli straightened his hat and took a step forward. But what he saw next froze him in place. A woman stepped out, her brown dress dusty from the long road. She looked older than he had expected, maybe in her mid-30s. Her hair was tied back and her face showed both strength and weariness. In her arms she carried a baby wrapped in a thin blanket. Then, to Eli's surprise, 4 more children climbed down behind her. 2 boys and 2 girls, their eyes wide and curious. Eli's mouth went dry. He looked from the children to the woman, unsure what to say. The woman took a deep breath and said softly, "Mr. Turner?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. You must be Lydia." The driver handed Eli a letter. "Came with her ticket," he said before turning back to his wagon. Eli opened the letter and read it quickly. The words hit him like a cold wind. In the letter, Lydia explained that she was indeed the woman who had written to him, but she hadn't told him everything. She was a widow. Her husband had died in a mining accident 2 years earlier. leaving her with 5 children to care for. She had feared that if she told the truth he wouldn't want her, but as the days went by, she could not bear the thought of lying to him forever. She had prayed he might still accept her and the children, but if not, she would understand. Eli's eyes lifted from the letter to the woman standing before him. The children huddled close to her skirts, their faces thin and tired from travel. The oldest boy, about 12, stood protectively in front of his siblings. The youngest was still crying softly in Lydia's arms. For a long moment no one spoke. Only the wind moved, carrying the smell of horses and dust. Lydia's voice finally broke the silence. "I understand if you don't want us here," she said quietly. "We can move on. I'll find work somewhere." Eli looked at her, unsure of what to feel. This was not what he had imagined. He had expected a young woman eager to start a new life, not a weary widow with 5 hungry mouths to feed. But as he looked at her tired eyes, something inside him stirred, a feeling he hadn't known for years. Pity, yes, but also respect. This woman had crossed half the country with 5 children, and no promise of acceptance. That took courage. He looked at the children again, their dusty faces, their hopeful eyes, their small hands clutching at her dress. He thought of his empty house, of the long, silent nights, and of how he had once wanted to hear laughter again. Maybe this wasn't what he had planned, but maybe it was what life had meant for him all along. Eli cleared his throat. "You must be tired," he said slowly. "The house isn't far. Come inside and rest. We'll talk after you've eaten." Lydia's eyes widened slightly in surprise. "You mean, you'll let us stay?" Eli looked away, embarrassed by his own softness. "For now," he said. "It's a long road from here to anywhere else. No one should keep traveling after a journey like that." Tears filled Lydia's eyes, though she tried to hide them. She nodded and motioned for the children to follow. They walked together down the dirt path toward the small ranch house that waited under the open sky. As Eli opened the door and let them in, Dusty wagged his tail and sniffed at the children, earning small giggles. The sound made Eli pause for a moment. It was the first laughter his house had heard in 20 years. And as the sun began to set behind the hills, Eli Turner stood in the doorway, watching the woman and her children settle into his home. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in many years, the silence of his house was gone, replaced by the faint sound of hope. The first few days at the ranch felt strange for everyone. Eli Turner had lived alone for so long that he didn't know how to act around people anymore, especially children. The quiet mornings were now filled with new sounds, small footsteps, soft laughter, and the clinking of dishes as Lydia tried to prepare meals in his kitchen. The once silent rooms now had voices, movement, and a warmth he hadn't felt in years. At first, Eli kept to himself. He spent most of the day outside, fixing fences or working in the barn, pretending to be busy even when there wasn't much to do. He told himself that they were just guests for a few days, that once Lydia found somewhere else to go, life would return to how it was. But deep down, he knew something inside him had already begun to change. The children were polite, though shy. The oldest, Ben, always watched Eli carefully, as if trying to figure out whether he was kind or dangerous. The younger ones followed their mother everywhere, helping with small chores or sitting quietly by the fireplace while she cooked. Little Mary, the second youngest, liked to hum songs when she swept the floor with a broom almost as tall as she was. Even baby Clara, who cried the first night from hunger and exhaustion, soon began smiling when Dusty wagged his tail beside her cradle. Lydia worked from sunrise to sunset. She mended torn clothes, cooked simple meals, and tried her best to make the cabin feel like a home. She didn't complain, even when her hands were red from washing or when she stayed up late sewing by lamplight. There was a calm strength about her that Eli couldn't help but notice. One afternoon, Eli came back from the barn and found her sitting on the porch with the baby in her lap. The sunlight touched her face softly, and the children were playing nearby. For a moment, Eli stood silently watching. The house that once felt empty now looked alive. He cleared his throat and said, "The storm's moving in from the north. Better get the animals inside soon." Lydia looked up and nodded. "Ben can help you if you like," she said. "He's strong for his age." Eli hesitated. He wasn't used to working with anyone else. But when he saw Ben's hopeful eyes, he simply said, "All right, come along then." That evening, they worked side by side in the barn. The wind grew louder and thunder rolled in the distance. Ben tried to lift a heavy bucket of water but struggled. Without a word, Eli helped him. The boy looked up and smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir," Eli nodded. "You did good. Not many boys your age can handle that." It was a small exchange, but it broke something between them, a wall that had kept Eli apart from the children. The storm hit hard that night. The wind howled against the windows and rain poured down like buckets. The roof creaked, and the barn door outside slammed open. Eli rushed out with his coat and lantern. To his surprise, Ben was already there, holding the door and shouting against the wind. "The horses are scared." Together they fought the storm, tying ropes, closing the gates, and calming the animals. By the time they came back, both were soaked and shivering. Lydia met them at the door, her eyes wide with worry. She took Ben's wet coat and wrapped him in a blanket. Then she looked at Eli, her voice soft but trembling. "You didn't have to do that for us, but thank you." Eli looked away, embarrassed by the warmth in her eyes. "Couldn't let the animals drown," he said gruffly. But he knew that wasn't the truth. He hadn't done it for the animals. He'd done it for them. After that night, something quietly shifted in the house. Eli began joining them for supper instead of eating alone in the barn. He even started talking with the children, asking them about their chores or helping them with small tasks. The children grew comfortable around him, especially little Mary, who followed him everywhere like a shadow. One morning, while Eli was repairing a broken fence, she walked up holding a handful of wildflowers. "Mama says you work too much," she said. "You should have flowers," Eli chuckled. "I don't know what I'd do with flowers," she grinned. "Put them on the table. They make food taste better." He couldn't argue with that. That evening, the flowers sat in a small jar on the table, and for the first time the house smelled like spring. Days turned into weeks. The ranch began to feel different, not just in appearance, but in spirit. Lydia hung new curtains she made herself. The children built a small garden near the fence. Eli built extra shelves in the kitchen so she could keep her things. Slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, this house of one man began to turn into a home of 8 souls. One Sunday afternoon, the preacher from town came by to check on them. He looked at Eli and said kindly, "Seems the Lord finally decided you shouldn't be alone anymore." Eli didn't reply, but a quiet smile appeared on his lips. As summer came, life settled into a steady rhythm. The children helped on the ranch, feeding chickens and collecting eggs. Lydia cooked meals that made Eli forget the days of eating cold beans alone. Every evening after supper, they sat outside and watched the sky turn orange and pink. Sometimes Lydia hummed soft tunes and the children leaned against her, sleepy and safe. One night, as stars filled the sky, Eli finally spoke what had been in his heart for weeks. "Lydia," he said softly, "when you first came, I wasn't sure what to think. I didn't expect a family." She looked at him with calm eyes. "Neither did I, but maybe God knew better than we did." Eli nodded slowly. "This place feels different now, lighter. I can't imagine it quiet again." Lydia smiled faintly. "You don't have to imagine it. If you want us to stay, we'll stay." He hesitated, his voice low. "I want that." From that moment, everything changed. They were married a few weeks later under the open sky behind the ranch. There were no fancy clothes, no big guests, just the preacher, his wife, and the children standing barefoot in the grass. Lydia wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself. Eli wore his best shirt and hat. When they exchanged vows, even Dusty barked as if giving his blessing. The children laughed and clapped, and the wind carried their joy across the valley. After the wedding, the ranch grew busier and brighter. Eli built 2 more rooms onto the cabin so the children could have proper beds. Lydia planted flowers around the porch. The boys helped paint the barn red, and every corner of the property seemed to breathe new life. Years began to pass quietly. The children grew strong, each learning the ways of ranch life. Ben became Eli's right hand, learning how to ride, mend fences, and manage the cattle. The younger ones went to the small school in town. Lydia's garden bloomed every spring, filling the air with the smell of roses and wild mint. Eli, once known in town as the quiet loner, became a man people admired. Travelers who passed by often stopped to rest, always welcomed by warm smiles and the sound of children's laughter. Folks started calling the place Turner's Hope. Sometimes when Eli sat on the porch in the evening, he would remember the day the stagecoach arrived. He could still see Lydia stepping down with her children, unsure and afraid. He often thought how easily he could have turned them away, and how empty his life would still be if he had. Now the ranch that once echoed with silence was alive with love. And every night as the sun dipped behind the hills, Eli would whisper a small prayer of thanks for the letter that changed his life, and for the woman who stepped off that wagon not just to marry him, but to save him from loneliness he didn't even know was killing him.